Unfortunately, The Simpsons were canceled in its 36th season. Oh, are you really going to tell me you believe that rumor? Recently, I started receiving a flood of comments talking about the end of The Simpsons. So, I went to research and found a bunch of articles talking about the cancellation of The Simpsons. But there's one detail here. This news only came out in Brazil, because in the rest of the world, nobody is talking about it. So, obviously, this is all just a big lie circulating on the internet. The most I believe will happen is that they'll take a little longer to release the 37th season. And very likely, this whole rumor comes from the first episode of season 36, where The Simpsons decided to joke around and created what they called the definitive final episode of the series. And taking advantage of this lie, let's take a look at what happened in this first episode of season 36. Because, my friends, things got pretty crazy. The episode begins with a big ceremony gathering all the celebrities that have appeared in The Simpsons, all for the grand exhibition of the final episode of the series, which would be a massive event. But before they start the episode, the event host reveals that Fox had tried to cancel The Simpsons several times, but never succeeded. And the most genius part of this story is that they recreate scenes from old episodes, showing us which were those canceled endings. The first time Fox decided to end The Simpsons was back in 1990 in season 2, in an episode called Bart the Daredevil, which is the one where the boy tries to jump from Springfield Gorge. Homer goes and stops him, but ends up falling. You've probably seen it. But what you didn't see is that, during the fall, Homer was supposed to die, thus ending the story of The Simpsons once and for all. But, according to the host, that ending never aired because the owner of Fox ended up receiving a $10 million fine because of a giant Bart balloon. So, they decided to delay the cancellation of the show to produce more episodes to cover the fine's expenses. But after that, they didn't give up on ending The Simpsons, and several classic episodes were originally made to conclude the series, like, for example, episode 10 of season 11, which is the one where the Simpsons go skiing and Homer keeps thinking about Flanders' rear end. And during this episode, Homer would simply end up dying because apparently to end The Simpsons, you have to kill Homer. But that wasn't even the worst ending they thought of, because in episode 7 of season 7, which is the one where Homer gets super obese and prevents a nuclear catastrophe with his rear end, but in the version we didn't see, while Homer was getting a medal for saving the city, the tank would throw him onto a dirigible that would crash into one of the nuclear plant's towers, causing a huge disaster that would wipe Springfield off the face of the earth. The perfect ending for The Simpsons, since everyone would die. But going back to the ceremony, the host explains that despite the numerous previous attempts to end The Simpsons, now no one wanted to be responsible for writing the final episode of the series, since many shows have been completely ruined by their endings. And no one wanted to carry the blame for ruining such a beloved show like The Simpsons. So, to solve all the problems, they decided to use an artificial intelligence to write the final episode. The Hack GPT, which was fed with all the episodes of The Simpsons and also with all the series finales ever made, all so that it could create the perfect ending that wouldn't stain the legacy of the series. And this AI was going to produce everything, from the script, the animation, to even the characters' voices. It was going to be basically a sort of live episode where, as the AI produced, we would watch it. And the story starts on Bart's birthday, except the clumsy Homer had forgotten to send the party invitations, so the boy had only a few hours to deliver them. However, as soon as he arrives at school, Bart discovers that it would be Principal Skinner's last day there, because he was closing the school and going to a better job in another city. He kind of implies that he would get a spin-off with Willie and Superintendent Chalmers. I'll miss this place. Meanwhile, at the nuclear plant, the workers received the sad news of the death of Mr. Burns, and unbelievably, he had left all his fortune to his beloved employees. But no, right? In reality, the old man was just pretending because he wanted to taste the pleasure of destroying his employees' happiness. But then, unintentionally, the crazy Homer ends up knocking Burns into one of the plant's cores, and the old man is simply done for. And since the fake will he made was legally valid, all the plant's employees end up becoming rich, and Smithers finally gets to fulfill his dream of being with Mr. Burns. Well, at least with what's left of him, right? And so the plant is shut down, because now everyone is rich and no one wants to work there. I just don't know how the city will still have power. But while all this was happening, Bart was still trying to deliver the invitations to his birthday party. But then he ends up meeting Kimiko, the wife of the comic guy, who is about to give birth. And since they wouldn't make it to the hospital in time, Jansha, who was casually passing by, shows up to deliver the baby. And he even uses a Star Trek sword to cut the umbilical cord. And very emotional about becoming a father, the comic guy decides it's time for a change. So he decides to close his shop once and for all. After all this, Bart goes to Milhouse's house and talks about all the strange changes happening around the city. But then Milhouse's parents show up and tell him they're moving to Atlanta because Kirk got a job there, and now they'd have the money to finally pay for Milhouse's eye surgery. And so the entire Van Houten family moves out of Springfield. And after that, the changes don't stop because Duffman marries Miss Hoover, Flanders marries Rod Powers, one of his neighbors, Selma marries that guy who only says yes, yes, Moe closes the bar, and the Springfield tire fire, the one that appears in the opening, is shut down. And witnessing all these changes, Bart goes crazy since he thought all of this should never happen. However, when he returns home, Homer and Marge tell him that they were doing couples therapy and had finally solved all their problems. And from now on, they would be good parents, and all their children would live in a functional and trauma-free home. In other words, no more craziness involving The Simpsons. But Bart doesn't take these changes well and simply runs away, saying that nothing would change. And so, we return to the closing ceremony of The Simpsons, where Hack GPT reveals that something had gone very wrong with the simulation it was making, and Bart had gained a life of his own and was completely rejecting the story. And terrified, unable to understand why things were changing for the better because everyone was doing fine, Bart also sees that Nelson's dad had returned and the real Mr. Skinner too. Because if you don't remember, the Skinner we know is a big imposter. But scared, Bart goes after the only person he thought would never change, Krusty. But to the boys' horror, the clown reveals that he's launching his final show. And totally disturbed by this business of changes, Bart comes to the conclusion that if he ruined the recording of Krusty's last show, it couldn't air, and the show would never end. But the boy ends up being arrested because now things were changing. Not knowing what else to do, Bart asks Lisa for help, but the girl doesn't care about the changes since she had won a scholarship and a Young Genius Award. Then Chief Wiggum shows up, saying he could finally send Bart to rot in a reform school. However, he says he won't do it because he's about to start a new chapter in his life, and he's been hired to work in the Chicago police to shut down that garbage. And so, very shaken, Bart returns home and is even more shocked when he finds everyone celebrating his 11th birthday. And this leaves the boy completely disturbed because it's been about 35 years since he was 10. And totally in shock, the boy starts insulting everyone around him. Especially Homer, who receives a barrage of insults from the boy. And because of all this, old Homer ends up returning. And so the entire simulation collapses and everything ends, restarting and going back to being exactly as it was before. In other words, none of the happy endings really happened, and The Simpsons wouldn't end. They were just restarted for the next season, which enrages everyone watching the closing ceremony of the series. And because of that, in order to avoid hearing the audience's criticism about the failed final episode, Hack GPT thinks it's better to self-destruct. In other words, The Simpsons surpassed their own finale. So, what do you think of all this craziness? Honestly, I don't think The Simpsons will end anytime soon. As long as they're making money, they'll probably keep releasing episodes. But now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think The Simpsons should end, or the more episodes, the better? Leave it there. I want to know. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends who are Simpsons addicts. But if you liked the video, check out this other one here. Go check it out. It's really fun.